think you get used to it because Barbara was
Because then you're gonna have a bunch of sugar.
Mommy, your hair's gray.
I know.
You get my hair long. But it's like
All
a
right.
pretty gray. It's like shiny. It's like
Okay,
a
so today we're going to cover Commandments 4, 5, and 6 as best as we can in our journey through the small catechism. All right. Yep. Okay. All right. Commandments 4 through 6. So honor, murder, and adultery. So Commandments 1 through 3, we commonly break up the commandments into two tables. Right? The first table is Commandments 1, 2, and 3, and it deals with how we interact with God. And the Commandments 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 deal with how we interact with our neighbor. And unlike the great documentary History of the World Part 1, Moses did not give 15 commandments, of which then one tablet fell and there was 10. But that is an all-time great scene in movie history. For those that like Mel Brooks, yeah. So, and he's still pumping out plays. He's in his 90s, still pumping out plays. And he always says that he's going to come out with the History of the World Part 2. So we'll see if that happens. But that's a different topic. All right. So, let us open in prayer. Heavenly Father, we give you thanks for this day and this time to study your word, to review the foundation of our faith as we study it. Be with us as we explore, open our eyes, our ears, and our hearts to what you have to say. In Christ's name, amen. On that back table is the handouts. Okay. So, the fourth commandment. What is the fourth commandment?
honor your father and your mother.
Was ist das?
We should fear and love God, so that we do not despise or anger our parents or other authorities, but honor them, serve and obey them, love and cherish them. As Christians, we give parents special honor as God's representatives on earth, gifts of God through whom He gave us the gift of life.
Right. So, in a lot of ways, Commandments 4, 5, and 6 are kind of the most contentious commandments. The ones people don't like off of just face value. And then as we explore deeper, notice that it says, do not despise or anger our parents and other authorities, right? So this is every parent's favorite commandment, every child's least favorite commandment, right? But then we start exploring what all authority means, and we realize that, well, we break this commandment all the time. So let's start at the beginning. God gives parents a unique task that serves the well-being of all society. Okay? Mother and father uniquely serve as God's representatives through He bestows and nurtures human life on earth. So this kind of talks about some of our vocations. You'll see this word here, vocations. And in Luther's time, the word vocation had come to mean simply church work. So priests and nuns, or monks, priests, and nuns, right? Those were the only ones doing vocation. And how the Roman Catholic Church still defines that term, it still only means those who are involved in church work. But Luther, famously said that the monk praying by himself the milkmaid milking the cows for her master is actually doing a better work to God than the monk in his cell praying. Right? And why is that? Because vocations are the various things that God has called us to, where we serve our neighbor, and we are a mask of God. Okay, a mask of God. In other words, God is working through us to serve our neighbor. And so He starts that with our parents. Right? Whether those are biological, adoptive, or foster parents. People taking care of us, raising us. Because what can children not do? Raise themselves, right? You don't need to read Lord of the applies to realize that children cannot raise themselves, right? From very early on, children don't want to go to bed. They don't want to take naps. They don't want to bathe themselves. They don't want to clean their stuff,
Don't
right?
want to eat right.
They don't want to eat right. Even as adults, we don't want to eat right. And so one of the jobs as parents is teaching children how to live, right? And so in doing so, they serve a unique task that serves the well-being of all society. And so we fulfill this commandment when we fear and love God by not despising our parents, our guardians, or other authorities. Now, what are other authorities?
Police,
Police,
the president,
the president, whether you voted for the person or not,
could be the king.
could be the king, right? Which leads to an interesting debate. And I'll pose this for you, okay? And I'm asking this in May, not July, for a reason. Was the American Revolution sinful or not? Yeah. Makes you think, right? We don't have to answer that right now. There's a lot of ins and outs with that. But so kings, presidents, police officers, judges, right? Mayor, city council, right? We have speeding limits in place, things like that are produced by local and state authorities. So there are a lot of different authorities. Some of them elected, some of them not elected. There is no God-ordained government. Okay, and what I mean by this, if a government at least allows the option of worshiping God legally, okay, we would be going beyond Scripture to condemn it. In fact, you can make the argument even if it's illegal. How Peter writes in 1st and 2nd Peter, honoring the emperor, even though Christianity was illegal at that point. He says, honor the emperor, right? And he would be killed by Nero within a few short years of writing those epistles. And so that can get us in a really big debate. This is why I said 4, 5, and 6 are very contentious commandments. Because people like to argue about these things. We live in a democratic republic with a capitalistic economy. Okay? And people like to say, well, this is God ordained. And well, if you want to say that the issue is then if you take it back to God has put in place all governments, then you have to say the same thing of the Chinese Communist Party, the same thing of the North Korean dictator Communist Party, those type things. I don't want to say that.
I think
Right?
it's easier to argue 1 Samuel 8.
Yeah. Which is they have rejected God by wanting a king.
Exactly.
In fact, actually, the last God-ordained theocracy was Judah. In a sense, actually, you could argue that it ended with judges when they decided they wanted a king instead of judges, so that they could be like all the other nations. So this one gets argued about and debated, not necessarily in name, but quite a bit. You turn on your TV to one of the 24-hour news stations, this is one of the issues that people are going to be arguing about, authority and how to use it, how to honor it, and what authority might be best or not best. And I always just caution, when we talk about that, we need to be careful if we're going to talk about a faith perspective, what we say and how we say it, because you could also bless the Taliban, which outlawed Christianity, right? So we have to be very, very careful how we speak about it.
I was always, I've always figured that, like, the only time that we really can take a stand on something is if what authorities are trying to do is directly in contradiction to God's ordinances, to what Scripture says.
Yes, and we're going to talk about that. All right? You're jumping ahead to the end.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine. In fact, actually, we asked this question, okay? What if my parents or other authorities poorly carry out their vocations from God? Okay? And then we'll get to the second question. Even if they carry it out poorly, they are due honor and respect for the very fact that they are authorities placed in front of us. That doesn't mean you can't disagree. It doesn't mean you can't vote them out or other means of changing things. But you still honor.
But we all poorly carry out our vocation.
Exactly, right?
Children, parents, the governments, I mean, you know, that is to what degree may be different, but we all carry them out poorly. We all are corrupt.
I don't care if it's AOC, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Trump, or Biden. All right? They are or were elected officials. And as elected officials of our government, they deserve that respect. Whether I agree with them or not, their politics or not, like them as people or not, like what they have said or not, I still have to respect them. All right? And there's a difference between respect and disagreeing and just disrespect. All right? And this is one of the things that we do as parents, try to teach children. My children don't agree with everything I say. Yesterday, clean your room, right? I don't want to clean my room, okay? Well, there's a disrespectful way to state that, and there's a respectful way to state that. And in teaching them that, you know, you still got to clean your room, we can talk about a disrespectful way and a respectful way to do those things when we disagree. So even if they carry it out poorly, it is still our responsibility, as Peter says, and as Paul says, as far as it lies with us, be agreeable to people. That doesn't mean be a pushover. That doesn't mean you don't stand for what is wrong and just allow what is wrong to take place. But it does mean that we show honor and respect to those that we're to show honor and respect for, right? They play hail to the chief no matter who the president is. Am I always to obey my parents and other authorities without question?
No.
Right? And that's the rub, right? No, not, right? And there's a difference between permits and compels, right? Currently, right now, our country, let's rip the most contentious issue right out of the headlines right now, right? Currently, right now, our country permits abortion. In many states, for almost any reason for the first trimester, okay? It doesn't compel people, right? Is it still sinful that it permits it? I would argue yes. Okay. So yes.
Okay, but what if it compels you to pay your tax dollars and fund it?
See, now, and that's why I said this is one of those contentious commandments, right? The government doesn't give an accounting of where your specific tax dollars go. Your specific tax dollars could go to the company in Ohio that manufactures the M1 Abrams main battle tank, right? Here. What?
I said, oh.
Yeah.
We don't even know where our taxes
Your
go.
federal funding could go, and it could have helped pay for the turnpike that got put in place, right? So, specific dollars the government doesn't give accounting for, and there is that. This is why we argue against federal and state funds going towards a place like Planned Parenthood, which gets $50 million a year from the federal government, something like that. Half their budget from the federal government, right? And why they get to say that 90% of their stuff is an abortion, because they list out literally everything, so painkillers and everything like that, and they're like, see, even though it took place to help with an abortion, they're like, well, that's not specifically abortion. And it gets weird with that. this is, in our society, in America, this is where we get to have a voice through our elections. Right? We get to have a voice by standing outside of these places and peaceably, respectfully talking with people that might be considering such a thing. Yeah.
When Jesus was asked about paying taxes, he said, "Give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and unto God what is God's."
And that's the other thing, right?
Yeah, and let me tell you, the taxes that they paid to Caesar didn't go to very good places a lot of times.
No.
That Christians, Jews, nobody would have, and still he says, pay them.
The taxes that Jesus and his disciples had to pay, and there's the famous story of Peter finding the tax money in the fish, right? Those taxes went to the same people, literally paid them, that crucified Jesus. All right? So, again, we can change things, but we still owe what is owed. And we can vote in people and vote out people that we disagree with and how they want to spend our money. That's the nice thing about our nation when it comes to that.
But we still have to realize that in a democracy, the majority rules.
And that is true.
So if I'm part of the minority, I might vote and it doesn't feel like my vote has any say whatsoever.
That's true. That's true. California has one of the, or if not the highest population of conservatives. And it just has a lot more people that are conservative. Right? And so actually in your list, this is what we try to kind of weigh together. Acts 5:29, we must obey God rather than men. Ephesians 6:1, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. And Matthew 22:21, then he, that is Jesus, said to them, therefore render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And so putting that all together and trying to figure out a way. And this is what makes that question I asked earlier, was the American Revolution sinful? There's a lot of different perspectives on that, because how do you want to kind of weigh that out? Was the taxation without representation sinful or not? And things like that. You can have a lot of questions. When the government or our parents compel us to do something that is directly contradictory to the faith, we cannot do that.
No.
All right? And that government is not doing what is God pleasing. Okay? So, and I use this example with the kids, if your parent comes in and says, you need to pray to Muhammad, right? You don't do that, right? The government sits there and says, you can't pray publicly.
I think Daniel was a good example of that, because when the advisors got the king to make it illegal for him to pray, and he gets caught praying anyway, because it's like, look, I'm gonna pray to God whether you like it or not, Daniel was a perfect example of that.
And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we
Yes.
won't bend the knee. You can throw us in the fiery furnace and our God will save us. And even if our God doesn't save us, we're still not going to bend the knee, and our God is still righteous.
Okay, contentious issue.
That's fine. That's what we're talking about today.
I was a teacher.
Yep.
And I was compelled not to say anything that was considered. I was in a good school, so I was compelled not to say anything that was to influence, specifically to influence the child to become a Christian because I was a Christian.
Yep.
But we could talk about anything, and they could talk about anything. But I personally know some teachers that their state would not allow that. They weren't allow Bible reading, they wouldn't allow anything. And I don't know how you teach world history without teaching the Bible also.
And there's
religion.
In that there's what's known as open or closed when it comes to schools. Mustang's a great example. It's an open school district. So Mustang School District does a lot, or allows churches to come in quite a bit, because it's open. And in this sense that it's open to anybody, right? So you either have to be open to everybody or closed to everybody. And so school districts or states can just choose to be closed to everybody as well. If you're closed to everybody, then there's more restrictive laws. And now here's the thing that we also have to balance, because we are trying to live these things out. Right, that person can't say their Christian faith. On the other hand, it also keeps the Satanist from, or the atheist from pushing their specific view on children. And that's what people try to weigh out.
If atheists are considered a religion, if they're not considered a religion, then they're able to say anything they want.
That's true.
But you have instances in some places where anything regarding Christianity cannot even be said or spoken, but if it were any other religion, Islam or any other religion, oh, it's okay, it's perfectly fine. So how do you explain that? It's like,
I'm not trying to explain it.
No, I understand that, but I mean, that's kind of the conundrum.
That is the conundrum, and this is why this is, again, one of the contentious
One more thing, then I'm going to be quiet, because this is something very dear and near to my heart. I taught with a Hindu,
Mm-hmm.
and I wouldn't have wanted her to proselytize my child, especially in grade school, because I know that they came home and they thought their teachers knew everything, and it wouldn't matter what I said, and it wouldn't matter that I was also a teacher. I wasn't their teacher, and so they took 100%. And I wouldn't have wanted them to come home and said, but she said this, and that's what I believe. It doesn't matter. You don't know anything.
Yeah.
And yet, as children get older, I think that it is wrong in the classrooms that do not allow children to say what they want to say.
Yeah.
And then the teacher needs to be open enough that they can say, that may not be what I believe, but it is a valid opinion that you need to look at a little bit further.
As I understand the U.S. Supreme Court rulings, that is supposed to be the case, that the children can express their faith, they can pray, things like that.
But there are some schools where they can't.
What I've seen happen is that schools err too far, and that's usually when they get sued for things like that. And the other thing is that state by state and even city by city operate under different rules and laws. And so we're trying to talk about, it's much different in New York, whether you're in upstate New York or New York City, than it is here in the Oklahoma City metro area when we're talking about this very issue specifically in schools. There's different laws and expectations and rules in place, and that's what makes this debate also kind of hard. There's not a federal standard, and there would be pros and cons to having a federal standard.
Well, there can be, because of separation of church and state anyway.
I just mean of how you address these things in the classroom
right.
and things like that.
Right.
They couldn't have a national standard for something like that because it would be unconstitutional.
Right.
Well,
That's a state by state issue.
it is, yes. That's what leads to the difficulty of the debate, because Oklahoma is different than Kansas, is different than North Dakota, South Dakota, so on and so forth.
And it's different when you have a different superintendent or school board. Because
Absolutely. It can be different depending on the teacher, on the principal. Right now, there's a case in front of the United States Supreme Court about a coach in Washington, right? And whether he compelled students or not to pray with him or not. I don't know all the facts of the case, but that's just what I've seen in the paper.
And if he did so,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, and my one piece of advice with a lot of these issues is to go and read the actual legal documents and the complaints, and not just the headlines and the stories, because I don't care what news you get, it's usually not what's actually legally being talked about or
It's skewed one way
or
or
it's
the other.
skewed one way or the other.
Fabricated and stuff, you know.
This is why the baker in Colorado won his case, and the lady, the florist in Washington, lost her case when it came to gay marriage, things like that. There was different things that were happening. So yeah, which makes it really fun. But you go back and you read the cases, and you know, not everything you hear is the truth. You have to actually read the documents.
I think the important thing for parents to take away is that you only have your kids a few hours a day.
You do.
And you need to know their teachers and their school system, because that's who's shaping your child's worldview.
And their friends.
And all you have is
That's a good point.
a few hours a day to correct that.
And this is what makes instruction at home. This is, you know, God told the Israelites, you know, put these on your arms, put them on your doorposts, teach them to your children. There's a reason He said those things. And it's not just because, well, if you teach your kid, they'll always believe this. But if you teach their kid, at least they will have a basis to know right and wrong. It's the same thing with why we have the creeds and things like that. We might have to split this up into a two-parter class, quite honestly, because like I said, these are three of the most contentious commandments. They touch on very contentious issues in society right now. And we've just used one example of it, right? In particular, talking about schools. You can, almost every act we take politically or even socially really revolves around this. And right now we are in a very hyper-political, hyper-partisan environment. You read the historians, very, very close to what the environment that led to the Civil War was like, which should take us a moment of caution and a deep breath when we talk about these things. Any questions on the fourth commandment? So go ahead. I mean, we're
One
here to
more,
talk.
because
I don't have, I have my opinions on some of this stuff as well. So.
Because this is just in the news right now about Oklahoma. Okay, there was a Choctaw, I think she was Pawnee young lady that graduated, and she has a tattoo on her arm, which she kept covered during school because it said you had to keep it covered during school. But it's got her Choctaw nickname.
Okay.
And she wanted to wear the feathers with her graduation, and then she had her motorboard decorated. And they specifically have a rule that you cannot decorate your motorboard. So it has nothing. This has nothing to do with religion, but it has to do with her heritage.
Yeah.
Now, the school board allowed her. They voted to allow her to do this, okay? So she walked through and they were interviewing all of everybody involved and everything, and the school board did allow her to do it. And she had the motorboard started to be embroidered, but then they had stopped because they didn't know whether she was going to be able to do it or not. But she said it kind of talks about the incomplete, because you don't know what's going to happen until you have a judgment. Now, this didn't go to court, it just went to the school board. The problem with it is that, I mean, I don't have any problem with her, but the problem with it is that if they allow her to decorate her motorboard, what if I am a Satanist? What if I am somebody else what if I want to put a sign on the top of my motorboard that says, I'm pro-abortion, or I'm anti-abortion, or anything.
And that's why, again, this is why, like, you have the open and closed concept, right? You either allow it all, or you don't allow any of it.
Do you know what school it was?
What?
Do you know what school it was?
No, they never said the name of the school.
So Mustang has that same policy.
Yes,
and
I think it's a state. I mean, most of the it said
each school has their own, because if you go to some of the
most
smaller
of them in
schools,
Oklahoma do not allow motorboards to be. She was Pawnee.
It has to be tied to an academic standard. So if it wasn't tied to, if there is a Native American standard where if you're this grade point average or you test here and you become here, then that is allowed to accord or some other type of regalia on. But,
they
that's
interviewed Joy Hoffmaster, and she said, I encourage the school to allow her to wear the feathers. She didn't say anything about the motorboard.
The heritage doesn't have anything to do with, which is where
Yeah.
our lawyer and where our school
Right.
system. It has to do something with the education.
Yep.
So if it's not tied to that, then
Yeah.
it's not. Because we have the same thing, and I argue with, we have military honor to recognize, but it doesn't have anything to do with the student, it has to do with the parent.
Right.
And so, we try to do things at the graduation that honors the parent and the family, the student, to be recognized in that way, but nothing on the robes or the hat or anything, so.
As you guys go about your daily prayers, always pray for our educators and the
Well,
administration and staff. because
going back,
there are so many rules that they have to navigate, and
don't want to put, anything out there because it'll come back to me, I'm sure, but, so.
it's only live.
I know.
Recorded
Yeah,
forever.
Sitting right in the chemistry.
So, anyway, so we're talking, and, no. So when you're talking about the different principles, and the problem is, so we vote in a superintendent who is aligned with the community and very strong beliefs of the community, and then something comes in where a Satanist group or something is coming in, and so now we stop that, and now we've stopped it for all of the other beliefs of our community that we strongly support. The opposite is true also when we have a strong faith or community or something, and they open something up for them to come in and present here at this event or change something for this. The very next time the Satanist group comes in, we are the same as this group, and now this previous superintendent or principal or whatever has allowed it, and now we're in that
You set a
same
precedent.
scenario. We set the precedents, and now we are in trouble. Okay, so.
And so let's talk about this a little bit, just historically. Let's just stay here on the fourth commandment for a little bit. So King Nebuchadnezzar, under his advisors, outlawed any prayer to any god except his statue for 30 days. And so what did Daniel do? Daniel went to his room and prayed. The Soviet Union outlawed Christianity. It was an atheist state. So what happened? Christians gathered in homes. They whispered hymns. They whispered readings, right? And so there is, again, they disobeyed, but they kind of obeyed at the same time. You see how that makes sense? And so when we kind of look how things like this took place in the Bible, how they took place and throughout history, necessarily getting in somebody's face and yelling about it is not always the way to do it.
It's more of I respectfully disagree.
Yeah. And, both Daniel and those Christians in the Soviet Union were willing to die. They were willing to suffer imprisonment and die, not openly flaunting the law by any means, but also saying we have to respect God first. We have to honor God, follow God over the rules of men. So where the rules of men and the rules of God disagree, we have to follow the rules of God. And doing that in a respectful way. You can argue that the civil disobedience in the 60s, the sit-ins, the marches, the things like that, fell under this same umbrella. They were much more public, right? They were led by ministers, including if you go and you get a full picture of the Selma Bridge walk, 3 or 4 people to, I think in the picture it's on the right-hand side, so Martin Luther King's left, there's a white guy in a collar, and that's an LCMS pastor that's walking across that bridge with them. He was actually one of the leaders in the Selma movement. So we lived in a society where you could do that publicly. Daniel, Christians in the Soviet Union did not. And so there's a lot of things to kind of suss out when we talk about this. So we can't just blanketly say, this is how you do it, right? But it does lead to good discussion. So, any other questions or comments on the fourth commandment? Okay, we're going to move on to the fifth commandment. What is it? Oh my goodness gracious. Oh, that's a book too. Good thing Eileen's not here. Larry and Janet, I might need your information again. Go ahead and read off the fifth commandment. What is the fifth commandment?
You shall not murder.
What does this mean?
We should fear and love God so that we do not hurt or harm our neighbor in his body, but help and support him in every physical need.
All right, so God created us to care about other people and to help them in their time of need. As Christians, we look after our neighbors so that they may enjoy the life God has given them. And again, this is another commandment that gets to the heart of one of the debates that are currently going on right now in society. Okay. So on its gloss, right, face value, shall not murder. We all know what murder is. Murder is killing somebody without cause in group, right, as defined by the world. And as we would define it in our society, killing anybody without cause, no matter what. But then, on the other hand, we put caveats on that in our society. We're going to talk about some of those things, so buckle up. So the first question is, who is my neighbor?
Everyone.
Everyone, right? Famously, Jesus taught, when asked this question, the parable of the Good Samaritan. Right? And you guys probably all heard this before, but the Jewish people and the Samaritans were very bitter enemies. The Samaritans were kind of cousins to Jewish people. They worshipped at different places. They sometimes worshipped different gods. And there's a lot of enmity between them, and the fact so much that Jewish people would walk. These pants don't hold this very well. I didn't know that. Okay. Would walk around the border of Samaria because Israel kind of curved around instead of through it. This is Jesus famously walked through Samaria. The woman at the well was a Samaritan. It was a Samaritan town, and he's like, I'm just going to walk right through it, right? And so in the parable of the Good Samaritan, there was the priest and the Levite that ignored the man, and then there was the Samaritan who put him on his donkey, dressed his wounds, put him on his donkey, dropped him off at an inn, gave the innkeeper money up front, and says, I'll be back for anything else that's not covered by this money, right? So everybody is our neighbor, the born or the unborn, those who are able-bodied and able-minded, and those who have disabilities. Those are all our neighbor. Whether they're good or evil, whether they're our enemy or our friend, they are our neighbor. So we fear and love God in keeping the fifth commandment by not harming our neighbor, which includes murder, doing or saying anything that injures or endangers another person's life. So one of the things that we've seen in recent years is the act of what's known as swatting. You guys probably maybe aren't familiar with this, but people play video games and other people watch these people play video games. And there is a group of people that when they find out they're known as streamers, when they find out their address, they will call in to the local 911 and say that there's a hostage situation at this address. And it has gotten people killed because they come in expecting a hostage situation, right? And if you act wrong, you know, make the wrong move or whatever, you can get killed. Famously, this happened when I was in Kansas, and it was a wrong address, by the way, that the person was trying to do. They busted into this guy's house and they shot this guy, and they couldn't prosecute the person that called it in because this crime was not on the books. It had never been a thing before. And so it played out very... What?
False police report.
Yeah, that's all they could do, though. Guy wound up, the father of 3 young kids, winds up dead, and all they can charge this guy basically is with a false police report. Yeah. So Kansas very famously passed a law about this. I believe North Carolina, because that's where the guy called from as well. Just a sad situation. Neglecting to assist people in bodily need and harboring anger or hatred in our hearts against our neighbor. Instead, we fulfill it when we care for our neighbor, looking after the physical well-being, coming to the aid of our neighbor, speaking in a way that helps and defends our neighbor, treating our neighbor with kindness and compassion. So this is famously where we hold that police, the government, right? Paul writes that the governor holds the sword to punish evildoers. And so police officers, to protect the life of another person, can take the life of somebody, right? You, to protect the life of somebody else, can take the life of somebody, right? Our soldiers that go to war, things like that, to protect the life of somebody else, can take the life of somebody. And in fact, from this understanding, famously, the Christian idea of a just war came about, which is when you think of the reasons for war, that understanding of a just war. In other words, you have to have a just cause. Somebody is another country is an immediate threat to you, or has attacked you, or an ally, and so you are responding to that threat or that attack, right? How we think of war, how war is even legally codified in the world, is off of the Christian understanding of a just war. So, but the fifth commandment speaks to many issues in today's society. I thought I got all the typos, and I didn't. I'm trying to figure out what I was trying to say there. In dealing with these issues, we need to remember these things. God creates, preserves, and protects all life. He is caring and compassionate toward all He has made, and He calls us to be so also. And God gives special dignity or worth and protection to every human life from conception, which is the moment of fertilization, onward. God created humanity in His own image. God's Son became man and shared our human nature. God has redeemed every human life by the holy, precious blood of Christ. Therefore, every human life is precious to God and to Christians. And so there are some specific issues that the fifth commandment talks about today that we're just going to list. This list isn't comprehensive. The one in the news right now is abortion, right? So where the life of the mother is in danger. So ectopic pregnancy, that is okay, right? There, the mother and the baby will die, okay? Because you're having a boy instead of a girl. Because you're 16. This might give me a lot of anger. Because you're raped. Or it's incest. That's taking a life, punishing somebody who is innocent. Right? None of you chose to be an egg that was fertilized. All right? Your parents didn't do a survey. you weren't up in heaven and God went to an egg and a sperm and said, you guys want to come together and make a person? Right? We're all adults. We know how that happens, okay? You should just see the kid's face when I talk about this commandment. They can't leave fast enough that night when we talk about it. Those are not scriptural reasons. In other words, biblical reasons, godly reasons. Okay? Is there a lot of pain in those things? Most incest is rape. Obviously, with rape, that's a horrible, horrible thing. And to be traumatized by that and then carry that trauma within you for 9 to 10 months, right? That's a horrible, horrible thing. And our heart breaks. As Christians, our hearts should break for those things, right? We should deal very compassionately with those people. But to compound sin with more sin is not the answer. And that's where we stand on the topic. Very closely tied with this is that unfortunately as a society we don't talk about miscarriage very much. The hardest funerals I've ever had to do have taken place in delivery rooms with miscarriages, just right there on the spot. I break down and cry. I'm almost crying right now. The loss and the hurt, and unfortunately that is just not something we talk about as a society. It's that and postpartum depression are kind of things that people know about, but we never really process through, unfortunately. And there's so much hurt and brokenness there. The second issue, abuse, whether it's spiritual, emotional, psychological, or physical, that is harming our neighbor, right? I forgot sexual abuse up there, but it's also part of that, and it falls also under the 6th commandment as well. But abuse, famously right now, there's 2 people on a lawsuit, and people are making jokes about it, right? And both are claiming that they were abused by each other. It shouldn't be a joking matter, but humor is one of the ways that people deal with trauma and deal with very dark things. What? Yeah, I know. 95% of abusers don't change. We have the statistics. 95% of abusers don't change. Abuse is taught. It's learned. It's not a. You witness it, right? It's not genetic. Kids that were removed very, very young, infants from abusive relationships and put into a good home very rarely grow up to be abusers, right? Whereas children that see abuse grow up to either be an abuser or be the abusee quite often, right? There's abuse of self, substance abuse, drugs, alcoholism, self-harm. Again, those are all big things in our society. We had over 100,000 OD deaths last year. It's the largest cause of death, I think, outside of potentially COVID. First time heart attacks, until COVID came along, heart attacks was the number 1 killer of people. And it took 2nd place to overdose right now. So that's a big issue in society. Alcoholism, we joke that Lutheran lemonade, right? You guys know what Lutheran lemonade is? It's beer. Right? So, we joke about it, but, we see people that, quote unquote, self-medicate quite a bit with alcohol. Whether it's, especially people that were in the military and saw combat action. Our grandparents in World War II, grandparents in Korea, now grandparents that were in Vietnam, and the atrocities and things that they saw, or just the results of combat. And therapy wasn't a big thing back then, but we see that, and oftentimes in reaction to trauma, we see self-harm. whether that's cutting, whether that's attempted suicides, alcoholism, substance abuse, things like that. And then finally, again, another very big issue that we see that the Fifth Commandment speaks to is bigotry of any sort. So that includes racism, anti-Semitism is a big thing about that. There was a shooting up in Buffalo, New York, and apparently the guy went on a big screed about the Great Replacement, or replacement theory is what it's known. Replacement theory is a very old racist trope. The Nazis kind of made it famous that the Jews in power are trying to replace you with immigrants so that they can stay in power. And nowadays they don't use the word Jews anymore when they're pushing it out. But that idea that one group or another is bringing in immigrants, in other words, people that aren't us, to replace us, is very, unfortunately, prevalent today. So any of those topics you want to talk about for the next 3 minutes? Like I said, we can probably pick this up again. Not next week. I'll be out of town next week. Pastor Ray Smith will be here, but the week after I'll be back. We can pick some of this up. But you can see just some of the specific issues the Fifth Commandment deals with. And I didn't put this one on here. I forgot to put it on here, but along with abortion is euthanasia. Right? In particular, we saw the push, and we've seen the push for assisted suicide because people have a terminal illness or terminal diagnosis, right? And so this quote-unquote dying with dignity kind of movement of I want to die while I'm still able-bodied and not feeble and somebody has to take care of me type stuff. The church does not, and Scripture does not promote life at all costs, right? In other words, like basically life to natural death is how it's called. So if you are alive because of life support, right? Okay, obviously the family's going on, has some very emotional things going on. It's not a sin to take somebody off of life support though, right? Naturally the body would die, okay? But to administer a medication, I shouldn't say a medication, to administer a poison, to kill somebody, right? Well, that's a different issue. If the body would be living. This is played out very publicly. Past 5-6 years, there's been cases of treatment refused to children, especially in the UK. There's that kid that wasn't allowed to go to any place. And basically, the state was like, if you try to take him anywhere, we're going to arrest you, right? The Pope begged the Roman government to send a Metaflight. The Roman government responded like, look, we'll take him to a hospital and we'll do what we can, right? And the UK government literally escorted the medical flight team out by police out of the UK hospital. I mean, so we see this. All of those things also are very, very emotional. There is trauma behind them. It would not surprise me if people have lived through one or more of these things. So we want to be very careful of what we say and how we say it. Some people do need to hear the law. Many, many people do need to hear the gospel. Right? Even if you had an abortion, you are forgiven in Christ Jesus. Not as permission to go out and have an abortion, but repentance over it. Christ has forgiven it. Right? You are an abuser. That doesn't mean you have an excuse to go out and abuse. But if you repented of your ways and you have changed, there is forgiveness. All those things, right? So, 2 minutes.
What if you refuse treatment? Like
You can refuse treatment. Yeah, that's fine. Because that will lead to natural death.
Right.
Okay? And people do that.
That's a Christian scientist.
Christian scientists do that. I mean, I've known people that are in their 80s and they get a cancer diagnosis and they're like, I'm 85, right? You know, we're talking prolonging my life for 6 months through the treatment. Is it worth it? You know, things like that. So, you know, you can always refuse medical treatment. That's not That's not sinful. It's when you actively take a medication to kill, right? Or you have somebody administer a medication to kill. That was a great question.
State-sponsored execution.
That goes back also to the fourth commandment, right? The state has the power of the sword. So if the people of that state, whether that's the rulers or us or whatever, say it is permissible for the state to put to death evildoers, then that is one of the jobs of the state. Those same people can sit there and say, we don't want that to be an option. It's one of the things. And you can make decent scriptural arguments for either way. Honestly, it just comes down to the personal conscience of people. We're talking about all the fun stuff today. We'll pick this up again next week, or not next week, 2 weeks from now. So go ahead and keep that list with you. If you can, I'll print off more in 2 weeks as well. We'll also talk about the sixth commandment, which is another fun commandment that people like to argue about today.